Posing Gloves here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make this sound. I'm going to show you mine, and then I'm going to show you what I based mine off of. Because we're going to be focusing mostly on this sound. And I have painstakingly attempted to recreate this. I'm one of those, it's another one of those resembles cases. We're like, oh yeah, I see what you were trying to do, but you didn't do it. So, and I'm done trying to do it. But that's what it is. That's my version. And I sort of went the brute force method where I just listened to each part and tried to get it. A sound like this has, it's really important to get that bite, right? So that attack, because the way the filters are behaving. So if that wow. And I'm going to show you some things that before you like go off and say, oh, this sound sucks. Let me show you one of the more touchy settings. There's a chorus in the middle of this chain. And if I barely move it, I can get different because of what I've got now is I've got the attack pretty darn close, but it's that warmth that this sound has that this sound does not have that I'm trying to achieve the same spectral content as this one does. So if I move this around, you see it gets a lot brighter with those. We go down. That's a bit darker. Go down again. That's different. So this is a very important control in nailing the texture that we associate with this sound. So I settled on 1.941383, and I'm holding down control to move it. But it's going to be some other control on here. I mean, if we get farther out there. So I'm going to explain to you how this came to be this important as we get going. So let's go ahead and get started. This sound is one instance of Harmor. So it's a little straightforward. Honestly, I hear it and I think FM, but I open up Harmor anyways because I'm just uber dang comfortable in Harmor. Like I just get working in Harmor. So that's what I prefer to do. I could open up Citrus and go at it as well, but for whatever reason, I didn't even consider that. Now, there's a couple things to this sound. This sound has sort of a hollowness to it, and it's probably because the filter removes the fundamental, but I went about it by removing the fundamental with the timbre. So you can come into the timbre and you can remove the fundamental there, but in reality what happened is it sounds like the filter is just moving that fundamental out. So it sounds like it's not got a fundamental there. Like I'm talking about the overtone structure. These sounds have a particular quality that after you've messed around with enough sounds that have specifically had the fundamental removed, then you're like, oh, that sounds like one of those cases where the fundamental is removed. Think of like a bassoon. That's sort of an overtone series is one that is a missing fundamental overtone series. Not that it's not there. There might be hints of it, but it's substantially reduced. And so here I substantially reduced it. If I add it back in, you get that. I definitely didn't want that. So I'm also reducing the rumble. The sub has been added in here. And if we look at our analyzer, so we pay attention to these two. So I'm going to remove this one. And you see they've both been reduced in volume. If I get rid of this though, it just disappears. So this is still playing a role, but it's interesting how its role has shifted. So this is sort of an art getting these first little bits. So this is me trying to just bully my way into what I think the spectrum should be. In reality, it was probably done through some processing, some different compression settings and distortion. And I pulled those things out as well. You see we have quite an effects stash here going on. In other news, we have here an effect. We have the soft saturation, and that is what I'm using as a distortion without it. That's what it sounds like with it. That's what you got. So we have the amount and the wet, and it's distorting. It's a great thing. We have the unison. Here I didn't get too specific. The pitch is in a very specific spot. Like, okay, that's counterintuitive, but the pitch is in a specific spot. Check it out. So here's where it is right now. And let's get rid of the effects real quick. So here's what we're dealing with. Right? That's what we have. And so if I move this just a smidge down, that sounds way different. At least to me, that sounds way, way, way different. And if I pull it up, that's like, oh, that's just too, again, what's happening here is they're all summing together different pitches and you get a different summing signal. And so that's what you have here. And this is really, really, really important at the beginning of the chain because after we add in all these effects and do all this processing, what we start with, these small changes make a big difference. So right now we get that. Let's move this down like 1. Like, holy freaking crap. That's a huge difference. And so you gotta like be aware of things like this when you're remaking sounds. Like these are the moves that get new people who are going at it for their first time. They spend hours and they realize how many tiny moves there are in this chain, and you gotta kind of know the significance of what you're doing at what time, and when you touch a knob, what you could potentially be changing. The EQ has a little boost in it, and so that's what I settled on. So this is my starting sound. This is a sound I have going into processing. Cool. So we go into processing. Some of you guys are going to be a little angry because you might not have this, but I used Isotope Trash 2. And the only reason I grabbed it was because it has a convolution engine that I really dig. And it's now one of my tools, so I grab it when I feel like I need it. I use the Impulse convolution. There will be a video in the Trash 2 series on this engine. Keep your eye out for it. If it's not already up, it's probably already up if you're watching this like a couple days from now. And in it, I tear apart how this thing works, sort of. I explain a little bit about convolution. Basically, you have one sound, you have another sound, and you mix them together to get a new sound. That's like the most like uber simple definition, but that's kind of what's happening. So I'm taking a sound here, and I'm combining it. Without it, that's what you get. But I did this. Now there's a whole bunch of impulse responses, and some of them work better than others. I knew that I wanted something from the amps folder to try and do this. You might be going, how did you know that? I just messed around with the amps folder a lot, and I know what it sounds like. That's it. There are others that I know what they sound like as well, and that's why I didn't choose those. That's why I went to the amps folder. Some of these don't work. Like that one wasn't. That's taking me farther away. But this Cambridge, this one Cambridge, this one was doing it for me. I was pretty stoked about this one. Then I went into the Trash module, which is a wave shaper. So if you have like fruity wave shaper, you can do similar things. I just gave it a little bit of love and went for a curve like that. That's what I went for. Without it, it's very, very dull. So it's important in this chain. It gives us back our high frequency content. So that is what I'm doing in Trash. I deliberately just wanted that in. It was convenient that it also had the wave shaper, but I was going for the convolution engine. So I immediately go straight into there. If we turn off these effects and just listen to that, that's what I had. And I was like, all right, we're getting places. Next up, an EQ stage. So on the EQ stage, we have this going on, and this sort of a curve. It's not moving. It's pretty much set. I usually name things like this, like I'm getting in the habit of doing it, like, and I also want to name it EQ so I know what I'm using. But I'll name stuff like you see filter EQ. That way I just know what role things are playing when I want to go in and change things. And you hold shift click to just rename stuff. And this is the curve I set on. I was trying to get closer, and I was looking at my spectrum, and you see we have what I call flux. I'm not sure if this is a real term, but I call flux. Flux, according to Composing Gloves, is what happens after the transient, how a sound changes over time. Like in physics, it's like how a system changes over time. So I believe that's like the definition. I'm not a physics person. Okay, so as you can tell, one day, maybe. But you can see that we have some flux going on according to Composing Gloves. And so that's a very interesting deal. So where I place this is going to have an interesting effect on the way the transient is perceived. And so that initial attack is very important. Now, if we come back into Harmor, one thing I didn't explain was that transient. So you'll see I have two things going on in here. I have a filter moving down, and that's controlling this low pass filter. So instead of using a volume filter as you typically would, I'm using a low pass filter, and it's coming on and shutting down the frequencies, but it's doing it very quickly. If I change this curve, you see it's just like a pluck. It's one of those things that if you're going to try and get an analog sound, this is a move you're going to want to make. You're going to want to make some sort of use your filter to control your volume, get a way more organic sound, like for like most analog sounds. Now, sort of not getting this right, but then you could come in here, and I also use the volume, so it's a combination of them both, and this is just phasing it in. So there's two, so I'm coming at this sound from two different envelopes, and this is just providing me with that wow wow, because there's kind of ran in, so I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that too, because I'm trying to make your sound. So anyways, those are some ideas behind some of these moves. Over here, we get to the filter EQ, and the filter EQ is a low pass filter, and it is actually being automated. So I'm specifically doing this. You notice it sustains a little bit at the beginning. That's because the bite and higher frequencies tend to hang out around there for like a little bit, because it kind of whooshes in and then whooshes out. And so I aided it with the addition of this is a low pass filter, my bad. It's letting the low frequencies pass. So that's what's going on. I called it a high pass filter or whatever. We could call it a high cut. That'd be accurate. Then over here, let's go to the fruity chorus. So at this point, I'm kind of like a little bit puzzled. What should I do next? How can I get closer to the sound? And so I decided to grab a fruity chorus, and I'm wearing a hat. I also forgot, man, I'm forgetting to say that these days. So here we go, fruity chorus. This is where things get a little weird. I normally don't touch too many settings. If I do touch settings, they're going to be this one, the delay, the LFO, and the depth. These are ones. But I actually went and I grabbed the cross cutoff, which determines what frequencies it's going to be cutting off. So it says process HF, which means process the high frequencies. So it's processing the higher frequencies here. And there's the cutoff point. And we've got this. Now I have a video on the fruity chorus if you're curious. There's this delay, which if memory serves me right, at this point, like I kind of just intuitively grab some things sometimes. You know how sometimes you just see a knob and you turn it? I kind of one of those cases. I knew I wanted a chorus though, and you might be going, how'd you know you want a chorus? And the answer was mine was very sharp, is what some people would say, and I wanted to smooth it out. It's very bright, but I knew that my spectrum was more or less around the correct area, so I needed to change the way the spectrum was sort of being like generated, but not without changing it too severely. I needed to change the feel of the spectrum rather than the actual spectrum. If that makes any sense, I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing to explain. But anyways, a chorus will let me do that. I knew that the sound of a chorus is something that I wanted. So I opened up the chorus and I began messing around. Now the stereo, pretty much, you mess with it. It's pretty straightforward. It says stereo on it. It changes your stereo field. The depth determines how far the chorus goes in. The LFO determines how fast you're going to be chorusing. And then the delay, again, if memory serves me right, is the amount of time it takes for the delay for the chorus to enter the sound. And the millisecond is very important. This will change our transient and the flux. So that's what I ended up settling on. But I was showing you earlier that this is quite a touchy thing. Now, our sound's very soft right now as well. So you may consider bringing up the volume. Now, before we get to that, I was still not settled on. I was like, there's got to be another way to get at this that I'm not doing. And again, I was probably FM. But I grabbed Fruity Delay 2, and I took the time, in this case, the steps, down to like really tiny, like 0.09. And this gives you that Haas effect filtering. In this case, it's just basically comb filtering. The same sort of deal as with the pitch knob, the unison that I was showing you earlier, except for in this case, I'm using time. So it'd be more like a flanger. But it's just a one set thing. The time isn't modulating, so it's staying still. So we're pretty much set there. Then I'm like, okay, I need to get back some of my spectrum. So I grab a wave shaper and I settle on this type of a curve. Now this one was an art because at this point I've been working on the sound for a while. So after you work on a sound for a while, you're able to like pick out bits and pieces of the sound that you couldn't pick out before. So I'm sitting there moving these things by super tiny amounts, because if you listen, there's actually a little resonance trail in the sound. It's like ew, ew, ew. It's in there, and depending on this shape, more or less would bring it out or diminish it. So I had to be careful, especially about this first line right here. So I settled on this sort of curve, and that's what went on there. And so, yeah, so you can sit in here. You can do a lot of detail work on most of these steps. Next up, I'm like, I need that warmth, right? Because I've got that, and it's a little bit louder now, so I can make some different judgments. Take off the headphones, listen over monitors, put the headphones on, try it out. Because when you're listening like this, it makes quite a large difference. Then I decided to try and get the warmth. I was going to just expand the crap out of, in this case, it's technically upwards compression. With a unusual ratio, with a curve, it's just upwards compression. It's pretty straightforward. So yeah, I was just gonna raise the mids up. So that's my only goal. I'm like, hey, I'll get the mids, and what I'm gonna do is I took down the highs a little bit actually, because I didn't want those in as much. So I just simply turned those down with that curve. But here, what I did was I need to get at some of the lows, but not all the lows, and I want to boost it, but I want to grab some of the mids, but not quite the highs. So I ended up changing the band. So I moved the high and the low, changing this band. And it allowed me to get at the part of the spectrum I wanted to and expand that while leaving the rest of it alone. And I even took the opportunity to adjust the highs as well. So that's what I went with there. Pretty straightforward. And then finally, we go through one more EQ. And my last EQ is always almost always some sort of a mixing EQ. So let's go back really quick before Maximus with it. So you see, I'm trying to get that warmth out of it because there's sort of had this like warmer quality to it. I didn't quite nail it. And there's a number of like small steps along the way that if I got them all just right, ideally I'd come out with the sound. Then the last step, of course, is EQ. Without the EQ, with it. So you see that changes it quite a bit and makes it a little more narrow. It takes away a little bit of the warmth, but not in a way that like bothered me. I shaved off some of the lows, which was typically where the fullness resides, and that's typically in like the 200 range. So it's like right there, but the low end will give it a sense of like depth, and I took that away, and I did a little cut at 1K because if you look here, that's an important part in the flux, and so that's another move I'm making. So I'm making a couple of decisions based on not just the timbre but the attack and a couple other things. And at the end, I ended up with that sound, and that's the one I went with because I was like, freaking screw working on this sound anymore. And I listened to their sound, and it's still my sound. Like you could tell, it's not close, doesn't sound like their sound. But you could tell the ideas I was trying to do as I got along. Usually with sounds like this, I come back later and then I'm like, oh man, that's what they did? Because you do some other experiment and you figure out like, oh, it was just simply 2 steps or whatever. So in that case, some of you guys probably get way closer than I do. So if you do, you feel free to drop a video of your process, what you used, the tools you used. I think I just did that by accident. So some of it also, when I noticed working with sound design like this, is if you create more of the track around it, like you add in the kicks and try doing the side chaining, do a couple other things, it's often easier to make judgments about what needs to be done. Because some of the way the sound sounds like it was made creatively, but when it gets mixed, they're gonna change some things. And so by recreating that mixing, it's also a little easier to make judgments. Anyways, that's the jazz. That's the jazz. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.
You'll see the day when fire rules. No shield, no chance at fighting cruel. And when the ashes start to clear, you'll see the sun is nowhere near. Floating in the void of space, the night is endless as the day. The senses call for something more than what can give them.